Hi, welcome to Fiberchats. My name is Irina. I'm the host here. My guest today is Julie Rosvall. Hi, Julie.
Hi.
Well, I met you at Vogue Knitting, and before we exchange a single word, I knew that we have so much in common because we have a passion for lace.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Tell me your story. Tell me how you started and how you came up with the idea of printing your knitting.
So I've been a textile person for many, many years. I learned how to knit as a child. And then when I was in my 20s, I moved to Nova Scotia. I had just started to learn how to weave just before I moved here in 1999. And I met spinners and weavers and really an incredible community here because this is where I live in Wolfville is the home of Mary Black, who wrote The Key to Weaving. So it's a very textile rich area. And a few years later, in 2003, a business partner and I decided to open a yarn shop, thinking at the time that we were going to serve, spinners and weavers. But it became apparent very quickly that there's more knitters in the world than there are weavers. So even though I was a knitter, I had to learn on the fly how to take care of knitters. So thank goodness there was the internet, because I was quite often in the back corner on the computer going, how do I teach somebody how to fix this? And so my skills grew very quickly in the course of about a year of being a yarn shop owner. And when I left that business in 2007, I was trying to find a way to remain a part of my community and figure out what I wanted to do with my knitting. And I didn't necessarily want to knit sweaters. I had enough sweaters. Socks are great, but I really loved pattern and texture and experimenting. I loved swatches. I desperately loved swatches. And I sort of thought, as I looked at printmaking, which I really loved as a medium on its own, I wished I could find a way to put the two together. And then I saw the work of an artist named Betty Goodwin, who was a printmaker in Montreal, who printed everything. So she would print birds' nests and packages and gloves. And I was like, wait a second, this could work. I could take a piece of knitting and what she did was she used soft ground etching. So she etched on copper and then she printed from the copper plate. And I thought, okay, I can do that with lace. And initially I thought, oh, this is great because I can just knit a million swatches that are 4 inches square and just keep trying out new patterns. But then I sort of, as you saw at Vogue Knitting, I got a little bigger and bigger and bigger, eventually knitting shawls and then printing them on paper. So I've sent you a few pictures of different larger shawls that I've knit, but I think that for me, that process was really interesting to be able to sort of memorialize or have the knitting on paper and sort of revered or taken care of in a different way. We wear our garments and they get worn out, but I felt like the putting it on paper and printing it was a way of preserving it in a different way and showing it as the artwork that it is. Because
When you did the very first etching, was it immediately successful?
no, no. No, I mean, to a certain extent, yes, because that first etching, it's, I learned a lot. So I learned that one ply yarn that has wool in it and is very tightly knit, while it makes an interesting image, it isn't 100% successful. So over time, what I did was I learned how to, I learned all the things I needed to do. So it needed to be applied yarn. So I needed the twist so that you could see the individual twist of the yarn to create an interesting image. I needed to starch my knitting. So you can see this is very stiff. And what I've done is I've just used white glue and water, and I've starched it so that the knitting stays, the pattern remains exactly the same every time I print it. So I might get 20 or 30 prints out of this little swatch. And the image is crisper because when you squish it, because it's going through a press, so it's got a lot of pressure on it. When you squish it, it starts to look fuzzy almost. So it was important to use silk or cotton, so you didn't get those little hairs that are sticking out, again, to get that crisper image. So I think that those initial experiments were successful because they taught me a lot about what didn't work, or what I liked about doing it. And it's been interesting over the years, sort of refining that and, really getting to enjoy the process.
Well, when you started, when you first tried to play with this idea, did you have a goal in mind to turn it into a business, or was it just to like play with the art medium?
No, I had a job. I worked for Craft Nova Scotia for 19 years. I loved advocating for craftspeople, and that was my focus in life. And to a certain extent still is, even though I've left that job, left a year ago. So it definitely was a hobby. I always wanted to be an artist. So this was, it was a dream of mine. I really love creating artwork, but I just didn't know for many years how it would play out. And I think the melding of the printing and the knitting was just perfect for me. So yeah, I never intended it to be a business per se, and I'm still not sure if that's what I want 100%, because since I left my job last year, I have been focusing in on it as I'm going to take a year. I'm going to figure out if this makes sense. But sometimes I've barely made any work this year because it takes so much administration to get out there in the world and write grants and proposals and look for, opportunities and build websites and all of that. So it's yet to be seen whether or not I would consider it as a business per se, rather than having it as, an artistic vocation. We'll see, yet to be determined.
Well, when you think about lace knitting, right? Do you go by what you feel like knitting, or do you go by, like, when you pick a project, do you already have in mind that it has to be etched, so you have to have like very clear motifs, or like how do you approach it?
Yes ish. So yeah, most of what I knit these days, unless it's for a gift for a friend, is definitely destined to be a print. So I do, exclusively knit with cotton or silk so that can happen eventually. I do tend to knit with a slightly larger needle so that I have a lot more white space, so that I can create an image with the knitting. So yes, I generally have done it for myself. So I haven't, while I have work to a theme sometimes, like if I see a call for entry, I've maybe tried to do that. It's always a little tricky when you don't, like, if you're not an artist who draws an image of a thing, it can be hard. But any print that I've made has, if it didn't work out, I could put it aside and nobody would know. I did this past year do my first commission, which was extremely challenging, because when you're trying to create a piece that the person has already decided approximately what size they want it, what shape they want, they chose the pattern, I gave them some parameters and a few choices, but and then if for some reason it doesn't work out within the timeline, the risk is much greater than if I'm doing it myself. And if I screw it up, well, too bad. I just move on to the next thing. But when you have somebody who's waiting for this thing, it definitely puts the pressure on. So that was an interesting experience to do that for the first time.
Are you limited by the size of the press? Like,
Yeah, and I've been pushing those boundaries very hard for several years, which has definitely increased my the issues that I've had as far as when I do a print that is about, the paper size is about 66 inches long by about 29 inches wide, and that is the limit of what my press can handle. It's too much actually for my press. So what will happen is, because a lot of the knitting, like if I do like a triangular shawl, there's a point where the knitting gets narrower at the end and the pressure changes on the press. So the paper actually shifts. And so if you're not really careful with every aspect of the project, you can end up with creases in the paper, which means that then that print as a whole is not able to be used. I can use portions of it, which I do. I cut it up into cards or to smaller prints. That's great. But the whole piece, the 66 inch by 29 inch, is not going to be successful. I push my limits. So,
I've read somewhere that you compare it to your own body, that this wrinkles and imperfections and how it reminds you of yourself. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
yeah, that's a challenging one for me. So I have a genetic condition that impacts, it's a whole body experience. So it impacts the connective tissue of my body. So I have fused ribs and vertebrae, which causes quite a bit of pain and discomfort. I have reduced lung capacity. So you'll find, like, I can't walk and talk at the same time, or even just talking for a long period of time, I get out of breath. My joints are very lax, so I have a lot of dislocations. It's gotten better over the years because as you age, everything stiffens up, so that's good. But the pain is there. So significant pain, migraines, cataracts, in my 30s. So, I've had multiple surgeries. I have an implanted recorder for my heart, because my heart is good, but everything else is sort of a little weird. Yeah, my body definitely doesn't always cooperate with me, and I sort of look at those prints that didn't cooperate in a similar way, that they don't get to be what they thought they were going to be. That, those prints aren't going to be a 66-inch print anymore, but how can I use that in the future? So that's something I'm sort of exploring. I've been working with a mentor this year, and we've been talking about, how can I use those prints that didn't work out in different ways? So maybe stitching over those sections, cutting them out and adding in actual knitted swatches into that cutout section. So that's a body of work that hopefully will be explored in the coming year. And I do liken it to how I feel about myself. So my body doesn't always do what I want it to, but I just have to find different ways around that. So, Vogue Knitting Live was amazing, being there with all these people who understood my work in a different way than I'd ever experienced before. But I spent 50% of the time in bed in New York. I went to New York City, and I spent half of that time having to be in bed because I was so unwell. But I was very lucky that I had help. I had people supporting me, good friends and a representative who took care of my work when I wasn't able to be there. So, I think you just have to find your way around these things. And that's what I want to do with the prints, is find my way around as well.
Well, tell me about wog knitting. Tell me about like what goes into the preparation for this thing, and tell me like your experience with the show.
It was exhausting. It was terrifying. Getting my work there was a lot. I didn't know for sure that I was going until early January, because I actually had support from the province of Nova Scotia has what's called a creative industry fund, and they help with export development projects. So I actually found out on January 6th, I think it was, that they were going to support a project for me to come to New York, which was amazing. Such a wonderful opportunity. But then I basically had to hit the ground running because I had to have promotional materials. I had to get my work ready to ship. I had to have somebody in New York who could be my representative, because if I did sell anything, they had to make the sale. I couldn't do that, because I am a Canadian citizen, and I wasn't going through the paperwork to be able to do that. So luckily I had a wonderful woman, Fiona Chinkin, who is a visual artist in New Jersey, who was able to receive all my work. She was able to set up the display, and be there on the floor throughout the whole weekend. And to have somebody who understands visual art, and has done art fairs before, it was really wonderful, because she just was able to listen to what I said about my work, and then when I wasn't able to talk about it, she just was able to take it from there. And so that was great. But I shipped everything down. It all arrived about a week before, and I had my promotional materials actually printed in New Jersey because it was faster than printing it here and shipping it. So it worked out really well. I would have to say that the experience on the floor there was overwhelming, because to have somebody like you who immediately walked up and was like, we need to talk. uh, you know and that happened so many times throughout the 3 days, where somebody would come up who I was familiar with. I was familiar with Fiberchats. I had seen your work. I think I had found out about you through a lace knitter in California who had posted something about you. So those were overwhelming conversations. That was like, I had spent 10 years here in Nova Scotia with people saying, oh, your work is beautiful. But most people, when they saw it in a gallery, didn't 100% understand what they were looking at.
Right.
So to have that level of understanding from almost every person who walked by was, it was fairly emotional a few times, I have to say. I mean, I was exhausted, so I was a little overtired, so maybe more emotional than it actually was. But it was so lovely to have those conversations. And
I felt like I honestly, like, I felt the same way being there, because
yeah,
to be surrounded by all these fabulous knitters and designers and yarn dyers, it just like it's an ultimate high. Like, for me, this is what dreams
it
and
was, yeah, it was 3 days of like, look at that sweater. Oh my God, look at that shawl. Oh my God, look at that scarf. Like, it was just every person that you met was your people, over and over again. So it was great, for sure. So many connections, so many conversations. So I'm not going to say I might do it again, because I don't know if I can, physically, if I can handle it again. But it was a chance of a lifetime and such a wonderful experience, for
yeah.
sure.
No, I'm really glad that we got to meet there and chat for a bit, because
Yeah.
and to see it up close and personal, like there is nothing like that.
Yeah, and I do think that that's always been the thing I've been struggling with, was trying to figure out how to get it in front of the right people, because anybody who sees it in person who understands knitting is immediately drawn in. So this was the first time that I'd been in a venue like that where everybody saw that and felt that. So that was
Well,
exciting.
besides printing, then there is the whole framing business. How did you learn that?
Oh God, that is a horrible experience. So yeah, so I did run into the fact that I am making bigger and bigger work, so the cost of framing is quite significant. So I did get to a point where I had to start framing myself. Um, I would be happy never to do that ever again, but right now it's still unfortunately part of the system. So I have had help. I have a mentor here in Nova Scotia who helped me. The pieces that I really wanted to bring to Vogue, which I wasn't able to because they were too big, they're 35 by 70 each, two pieces. We framed them together, Bonnie Baker and I, and so I was able to. I have a supplier for framing supplies now, and so I'm able to get all the components, and then we assembled them here in my studio. So that's good. But you know, I'm hoping someday I'm gonna get to a point where I'm just gonna send everything out and let somebody else deal with that aspect of it because I'm not a framer. I'm a knitter and a printmaker. That's where my focus should be. So
Well,
someday.
do you have like a dream or ambition or something or vision of where you want to go with that?
Oh, that's a tough one. Yeah, I don't know if I know what I want any at any given moment. Every time I think I know, then if I get that thing, then the goal post shifts. So I think that just having the opportunity to talk to people about my work, I think um, for me, I think building community is a really important aspect. That was my work, my job for so many years. And I do miss that aspect. It's been almost a year exactly since I left Craft Nova Scotia. So I'm trying to find ways to integrate community into my work. So collaborations, I think, are going to be a huge part of it. Right now, I'm working on a collaboration with a woman by the name of Tina Arsenault of Arquoise Press, who does letterpress printmaking, and Ellen Tambre, who is a bookbinder. And I have an exhibition coming up in Newfoundland in April. And one of the things we're going to do is we're creating a book of my prints, and then Tina is doing a letterpress interpretation of the chart and the knitting pattern, and then Ellen is going to bind that into a book. So there'll be 10 swatches that are printed and the 10 patterns and charts, and then bound in a one-of-a-kind book.
I'll be the first to buy that book.
I'm so excited that they'll. Our goal right now is we need one copy for April 7th for my opening, and then I think it's going to be a limited edition. So I think there'll probably be about 10 copies of this book, and then maybe like a reproduction version, like a booklet that is just printed commercially. Maybe like 100 copies or something. But that's collaborations like that, I think, are going to be a key part of my practice going forward. I'm working with my mentor, Bonnie Baker, on a residency program for printmakers here in the province. We're looking at how to open up print studios to people who don't have access to the equipment, because unlike knitting, I mean, you can buy a pair of needles or get them at the thrift store or have them handed to you from a neighbor, and get some yarn and you can start. Printmaking is a little more challenging. There are certain processes you can do with limited equipment, but as you grow as a printmaker, you need more space and you need more equipment. So I think residencies are going to be a part of that. I love having people come to my studio. So if I had somebody sitting at my loom using it, or my spinning wheel, or at the press, that couldn't make me any happier, because I physically can't always be there. So to have the equipment in use, I think, is going to be another big part of things for
Well,
the future. So
Talking about your equipment, can you tell me the story of your press? Because I saw the somebody showing around your studio, and that caught
Yeah.
my eyes immediately.
So that press was made by a friend of mine, Peter McKelvey, who was an engineer, and he also does he does metal work, and he's also a scrounger. So I had purchased plans off the internet. And he was able to adjust them because he's an engineer and he couldn't just leave it alone. So he had to do his tweaking, and he built the press, and a lot of the parts of it are all scrounged and found from the scrap yard. And then a friend of mine who's also a printmaker, Dave Power, who is one of the sweetest guys on earth, started printmaking because I was printmaking. So he was like, I think I'm going to try that too. He was in his early 70s. He's like, I think I'm going to give that a go. And he actually gave me a wheel off of a sailboat. For the wheel of my press. So it's a pretty special press that means a lot, because two people in my life sort of made it happen for me. So I love that bit of equipment.
Do you think you're getting like more brave as you grow older?
I would say yes. Yeah, I mean, I've always been happy to go out and meet people and try new things, but I think this past year, taking I thought I would retire from Craft Nova Scotia. I thought that would be 10 years from now, I would be saying my goodbyes and I would be walking away as a retiree. So I didn't know a year ago that this would sort of be my path. But my body had other ideas. I just physically couldn't do it anymore. So I think that taking that leap, while this year has not been easy, it's been hard. There's been some bad days. But I made it this far. I made it a year in, and I'm still here. And I just went through this incredible experience in New York, which I never would have done before, because I just wouldn't have felt like I had the time or the money, or I just couldn't do it physically, so I wouldn't try. So feeling like I didn't have any other option but to try is probably a good thing, I think.
Well, when you, I think it's brilliant. When you have those bad days, how do you pick yourself up and how do you find the motivation to continue?
um, in the past, it was always being driven to make sure I was taking care of other people. So I'm still looking for ways to do that, so that because I enjoy outside motivation. I like being forced to do things by other people, like just feeling not an obligation, that's not the right word, but a motivation to help other people. So I'm trying to figure out how to do that. So I do force myself to have deadlines for things, and that's usually helpful. So I just, say, I'm gonna go to Vogue Knitting Live. All right, I have 6 weeks to make that happen. What do I have to do? And then, you have to do a spreadsheet to do a timeline to, work backwards as to what you need to do next. So yeah, I think I just make lots of lists.
Are you very organized in general?
I am like a dual personality type of person. So I'm an incredible introvert, but as long as I'm doing a job or talking about something I love, it is not apparent to the outside world. I am incredibly organized, but if you saw my desk on a day-to-day basis, you would be, horrified. My husband looks at how many icons I have on my computer, on my desktop, and it just like sends him into just drives him. So yeah, I would say I'm organized, yeah, in many ways, with a little bit of disorganization on the side. So
Well, you're sharing your studio space with your husband, actually.
The lower level, yeah. So I sort of take over sometimes, yes.
How supportive is he of your newfound business, newfound career?
He's incredible. Peter has been, I mean, we've always been good partners in everything in life. It's always just been the two of us. So we've always really pushed each other to do the things that we love. So yeah, he certainly grumbles sometimes when I'm taking over the space downstairs and I have all my framing stuff piled on top of vehicles and work tables and everything. But he's the first person to run to the city to pick up supplies or drop something off for me or come and lift a box or whatever needs to be done. He's always at the ready. So yeah, incredibly supportive.
Let's talk about like how much time goes into a print. You have to find a pattern, you have to knit that pattern, you have to starch it, you have to edge it, you have to do this whole like estimate for me.
I mean, certainly the pattern, it depends on the pattern, because as you know, with lace, it can be anywhere from 25 or 30 hours to 200 hours to knit lace, depending on the size and the complexity. So certainly that's a huge part of the process. I tend to block out my knitting at least twice. So I usually block it once and then photograph it as a garment. So that's certainly going to take, a couple of hours of my life doing that. And then I block it out again and I actually use white glue and water to starch it. So, we're talking about another hour, or two there. The printing process can be quite intensive. So, inking and printing, paper prep. So yeah, you're talking, if you're just talking from start to finish to create one shawl print, it could be, when I did the commission, I estimated that it was going to take 3 months from start to finish, from the time we chose the pattern until it was framed and ready to ship. And while that's not working on it like 8 hours a day, 7 days, 5 or 6 days a week, but that is a significant amount of time each week doing it. So I wouldn't allow less than a month or 6 weeks to do a shawl print, just because, and probably longer if it was a complex pattern.
You have trouble pricing it.
It definitely is. I think all artists are challenged by pricing. I have more trouble pricing the pieces that are so I have the individual prints that I sell. So that's just the print on paper. Those are much easier to price out because I know what the cost of the paper is. I know that each print takes this much time. And I would say, okay, each print, if we're talking percentage wise of, if it's an edition of 20, there's a percentage of how long it took me to knit and prep and whatnot. So I find that easier. When I get down to pricing the actual shawl framed with the print and the plate in some cases, that becomes more challenging because for me, there's an incredible amount of value on that piece of knitting and that copper plate that it's hard to, like, it's not just about how much that piece of copper costs or how much yarn is in that shawl, because honestly, for a lace shawl, there's not that much yarn.
Right.
So I always use 100% silk, beautiful hand-dyed yarn, because I mean, why wouldn't you? Why would you knit with anything else if you have the choice? So yeah, it definitely becomes more challenging the more invested you are in the individual aspects of the piece. So yeah, a copper plate, something like this copper plate, it's definitely gonna be more of a challenge to price it out when I include this as as part of the final piece.
Right. Do you ever have time to knit just for pleasure?
Most of the time at this point when I am knitting for pleasure, it is for gift giving. So, I think the last time I did that was last January. But I do have multiple projects that I'm ready. Like as soon as I keep saying as soon as this thing happens, I'm gonna start knitting again. But once I get Newfoundland, which is the next big project in April, it's my first major solo exhibition in another province. So once I am done that, I'm hoping maybe some of these projects that have been on the shelf will start to get out there. And they are like literally weaving projects and knitting projects that are people's birthday presents from last year. Or this on my loom right now, this is a gift for somebody who moved away in September of 2021. And it is not done yet. They're going to move back before I even get it done. So anyway, it is what it is.
Well, usually when you talk to knitters, they have this like one dream project that they haven't yet feel brave enough to attempt, but like it's on the list of things to knit before you die kind of thing. So mine personally is Princess Shawl by Sharon Miller. Do you have yours? Something that you would like to print and knit and print?
So I think while I have avoided and said quite vehemently that I don't need to design my own shawl to print because there's enough wonderful designers out there, it probably would be pretty amazing to design a shawl, knit it, and print it. So someday, maybe I'm going to do that.
Oh, you should definitely do that.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not a lace, a knitwear designer. I've literally, I think I've designed like 2 hats and a couple scarves. That's the only things I've ever designed. And I on the fly just, actually sort of adapted and designed a couple of sweaters, but they were just for me and they were for nobody else. So, I'm not a designer by any means, but I feel like I have enough knowledge of lace that I could, figure out how to. It may only be a rectangle. It might not be like a shaped, shawl. But
Nothing wrong with that.
yeah, I think that that'll probably be my next dream knit print would be to do that.
Well, when you look at your journey so far, like you've been knitting all your life, you've been printing for a while, now you're combining it as combined medium. Where do you see yourself on that journey? Like, are you an advanced person? Are you intermediate? Like, how would you
That's a tough question.
evaluate yourself?
So when I last year, some of my colleagues actually nominated me for an emerging artist award, which seems weird, but when you read the criteria, if you were under 12 years, I can't remember if it was 10 or 12 years working in a medium, you were still, and you had just had like one show or no shows or something like that, then you were still considered emerging. So it really depends on where you're looking. You can meld yourself to almost any criteria at this point. So I would say I'm emerging to mid-career. Like I'm on that like cusp because I had a couple of little solo shows just at smaller venues here in Nova Scotia, at Harvest Gallery in Wolfville in 2021, and at Lucky Rabbit Pottery in 2022. I had little solo shows, but the one in Newfoundland is my first like actual like gallery where they pay you artist fees and the whole works.
Right.
So this is my first solo exhibition. So I guess I'm like almost ready to say I'm getting into, past the emerging part. As far as a print knitter. So
Well, what does knitting mean for your life? Like what role does it play?
It's pretty all encompassing, I would say, even though I'm not knitting on a daily basis right now. Um, Most of what I do and think about, and you know, I'm doing a little bit of writing for Digits and Threads and Visual Arts News, things like that. I'm planning out projects for myself and collaborations with other people. When I see the world, I see pattern and texture everywhere. So I would say it's pretty all encompassing.
When you went to work knitting, was that overwhelming in the sense of like textures you've seen and things you were thinking you can print?
Yeah, I definitely saw a lot of people that I would have loved to have run after and said, "I would like to print your shawl." So yes, definitely there. Certainly New York in general. I got to go to the Tatterblue Library in Brooklyn, which was a dream of mine, and had incredible conversations there, and got to go through their collection of pattern books, and really think about what I'd like to do next for projects. So yeah, New York was definitely a place to see pattern and texture everywhere, and be inspired. Like, it made me come home and want to pick up the needles and start on the next project.
Well, I can't wait to see what else you're gonna create. It's been wonderful meeting you there, and I was a big fan of the prints on your walls, and I'm sure you're gonna create something even more magnificent.
Thank you so much. It was so great to meet you, and thank you for having me.
No, thank you for being a guest of my channel today. It was a pleasure.